I'm Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. Really pleased to have you join us here for a city talk on whether we're ready for a revolution. What's the future for downtowns look like? And we've got some fabulous folks here to help us get the conversation started. This is still continuing to be a very sobering and challenging moment for people in Canada, and particularly people working on urban issues and the future of communities in Canada. It's Indigenous History Month, but as we know, Indigenous challenges are all around us all the time, and this week and last highlighted in visceral, disturbing ways, which are going to continue to elevate, I think, the systemic barriers that cities have often perpetuated and reinforced to keep us from having truly inclusive and just cities. And so it continues to be a struggle, I think, for lots of folks about trying to come to terms with the tragedy of history, but also just our continued complicity with things that reinforce these patterns. And I should just say off the top, too, that I'm in Syracuse, New York, broadcasting from there, which is the traditional territory of the Onondaga Nation, which are the firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the Indigenous peoples on whose lands, ancestral lands, I happen to reside. My sister lives here, and I've come here to be with her for a few weeks while she has some surgery. And I was just sharing with my colleagues that Syracuse is an old industrial city in the upper New York State, had all sorts of challenges before COVID, largely economic, around how its economy would recover from being organized in one particular kind of way to becoming more diverse. And even here where restrictions have been lifted, some of the COVID restrictions have been lifted, all you have to do is walk down those main streets to still realize that we have challenges in cores across North America, not just in Canada, and they are challenged by all sorts of difficulty, but also opportunity. And I know that my colleagues here will join me in talking about what are the sort of seeds of regeneration that we can see in downtowns and how might they recover and incubate new kinds of things. The other thing I just want to acknowledge too, London, Ontario is my hometown, and London is deep in grief this week, and that is triggering all sorts of other anxiety and concern for the Muslim population, but other faiths that are feel conspicuous and feel unwelcomed and fearful of their legitimate tenancy as urban dwellers in Canadian cities. So I'm just going to acknowledge that and recognize that we are struggling on multiple fronts here, not just one kind of pandemic, but several others at the same time. So it's in that context that we're going to talk about downtown. And I just want to say, I mean, I'm of a generation, I said to my colleagues, I'm the Petula Clark generation. I remember when that song came out, my father loved Petula Clark. And I remember the sentiment of that song, that when you're alone and life is making you lonely, you can always go downtown. There was something about downtown and the proximity to people and a sense of experience that something would happen downtown that might not happen anywhere else. And during COVID, we have seen remarkable challenge to downtowns. All of a sudden, office workers weren't there. Transit wasn't taking us downtown anymore. There were maybe no reason to go downtown. Sporting events, culture, all sorts of experiences that you generally would associate with happening in the core weren't happening. And in fact, what's happened is we've seen a kind of new kind of fissure developing, FISSURE, I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, of what we see downtown, with lots of without the kind of diverse mix of people and uses. And in fact, more and more downtowns are not seen as safe because there aren't as many people and isn't much activity. And again, this is something that was starting to happen before COVID, and that's why some cities around the world have 24/7 nightmares, I think they're called. Not nightmare as in can't sleep, meaning evening, the mayor who helps make the evening life vibrant in a city. And that was part of what I think the nightmare mandate was about, was enlivening our downtowns on a 24/7 basis. And two anecdotes before we start. One is just that Mayor Daley, the first Mayor Daley, was criticized in years, Mayor Daley of Chicago, about why did he spend so much money on downtowns? And his reply to the critics was that an apple rots from the core. And so he made a decision that that's where his investment focus would be. So I always want to try to remind people that we had at CUI had started with Bring Back Main Street being a focus on neighborhood economies and local environments, because we were all working from, that's not true. Lots of people were working from home, and they became more and more aware of what they needed on their main streets. they're going to transform. And we then added a couple of months ago, at the beginning of the year, we added on a session to talk about a program to talk about downtowns, because we think these are the two sides of the same coin. There are main streets in downtowns, but also downtowns have a unique historic function in different sizes of cities, actually. And so that's our focus for today. Just remind everybody that we have an active chat here. We encourage you to check in, tell us where you're signing in from. I see a number of you already have. I encourage chat on the chat, so please feel free to raise questions, and often you guys answer your own questions on the chat, which is great. Or you can direct questions to the folks on the panels here, and I will relay them over. We record this session, and we publish the chat, and we publish the transcript, so just remember what you put up is visible to everybody and benefits everybody. So let's just start if we can. You can see that we've got a group here that are from across the country, and interested to hear their different perspectives. So Martine, I'm going to start with you, if I may. Welcome to City Talk, and really appreciative of your particular insight on what you think the challenges and opportunities are to downtowns.
Hi, thanks so much. It's really nice to be here and really lovely to see so many people on the participant list, some familiar faces, or I guess names. I'm coming to you from Toronto, and today I just want to discuss two things that I think are relevant to downtowns, also relevant more broadly than downtowns, but super relevant to this downtown kind of revitalization conversation. The first of these is financialization. So in Canada, real estate is increasingly being acquired as a product for financial investors. This is a trend being called financialization, in which we're seeing financial firms like real estate investment trusts or REITs, asset managers, institutional investors, private equity firms, buying up large portfolios of real estate. And what they do with this real estate is they treat it like a financial asset, prioritizing profits for shareholders and executives above other goals. The thing is that cities and homes and workplaces and urban spaces in our cores are not financial assets. And we need to consider other goals when we are envisioning urban cores that we want to have, including goals like affordability, inclusivity, quality workplaces, environmental sustainability. There's so many socially minded goals, I think, that a lot of us consider. And so these aren't the type of things that are prioritized by these firms. In my work, I study housing, focusing on the financialization, particularly of multifamily apartment housing and seniors housing. And when it comes to housing, we don't need financial landlords and other large corporate firms involved at all. Our post-COVID cities and cores should include more affordable homes, socialized ownership of multifamily housing. And then when we look at downtown cores, here we see a lot of office and retail spaces as well. And we need to make sure that when we're thinking about how do we deal with these spaces, a lot of which have suffered during the pandemic, that we don't end up using public funds to subsidize and enrich financial investors through bailouts or subsidies and other types of programs that are just going to end up assisting financial vehicles that own a lot of this real estate. So these firms prioritize profits, giving them public funds and expecting them to prioritize the public realm or affordability or whatever other socially minded goals we might have. That's naive. If we want to use public money to pursue these types of goals, it should be spent 100% directly on the spaces that we want and trying to nurture nonprofit and co-op and decommodified spaces and sites for building communities. So that's one of the things I want to talk about. And then the other is that we've seen the impacts of doing things the same old way. I think a lot of us today are going to talk about how do we shift away from the status quo. Over the past few decades, the status quo, neoliberal urbanism and neoliberal governance has brought us vast inequality in cities and countries. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And there's nowhere that you see this more clearly in our cities than with the rise of encampments. So of course, homelessness is not new, but we've seen in cities across the country during COVID, the establishment of tent cities, encampments for the homeless in sites that are far more visible than in the past. In Toronto, where I live, many parks have encampments with tents, sometimes 30 to 40 tents, also small shelters. And as cities reopen, we're going to see the streets are going to be taken over with patios, people from all walks of life hopefully enjoying urban spaces. And we need to ensure that encampment residents are not pushed aside. In Toronto, what's happening is that residents of these encampments have been issued eviction notices. They're living at constant risk of displacement. It's also common for the city to destroy their belongings, which is very destabilizing. And people are also dying. There were over 6,000 overdose deaths in Canada in 2020. So we need to take all of this really seriously and assist and support people who are living in encampments rather than stigmatizing, criminalizing, and displacing or evicting them. So of course, nobody should be living in a tent in a city park. But evictions are not the answer to help these people. Instead, we need to protect our neighbors in encampments until they can be guaranteed proper housing, and not just temporary shelters, but permanent affordable housing with supports if necessary. And I think as we work towards this, we also need to be creating a city that's kinder to all people, including the homeless. So we need things like benches for people to sit down on rather than benches being removed, water fountains with water, public washrooms for everybody to use. So I think all levels of government need to be on board with these types of changes. Affordable housing in particular needs funding and support from the city, the province, and federal governments. And we need to build new affordable housing, acquire existing properties that are affordable, expropriate properties that are being held vacant or that have been abandoned by speculators, and repurpose our city structures and spaces for the social good. So those are my comments, and I'm really excited to hear the ideas that others have.
Thanks, Martine, and thanks, Susan, for telling me to get that fan out of the shot there. I'm in a different situation now, so I had, the backdrops are always different. We were actually saying during the beginning of the sound check that there's something different about this, that we all have access to each other's personal spaces, and I don't know what's going to happen when I'm always going to think of Ken Greenberg sitting in that room, and so anyway, but somebody asked, Susan Fletcher asked me to adjust my camera, so I hope that's okay, that you aren't being distracted by the fan any longer. Martine, couple things. One that your comments make me think of. One is, who owns the city, right? Like, who owns our downtown? And I think that harkening back, because I'm a child of the 60s, that Pat Clark song was really that the downtown is ours. That's the question. Is it, and how do we make it a downtown for everyone? Years ago, CUI did a series of reports around downtowns being for everyone. And I think maybe, do we have a moment now to reclaim, as you suggest, and try to wrestle away some of these amenities to be more inclusive and back in common use, right? Kind of the commons, I guess that's the question. And the other thing is this notion that you just suggested around financialization that affects housing, and it affects all sorts of common spaces. And where the question is going to be, I think, as we see money flooding in to recover from COVID, is there a way for us to ensure that that money is invested in things that are common amenities and not private amenities, right? Yeah, it's a big challenge. Okay, Michel, I want to come to you next, if I may. I know you've got thoughts about the opportunities that are available to us in downtowns. Why don't you give us your perspective as a designer, and then I'll go to Alkarim and then Ken at the end. So go ahead, Michel.
Okay, thanks for having me. Thank you, Mary, and hello to everyone. I think what we've seen in the last year is and I can speak to what we've seen in Montreal, our specific experience of the urban environment during COVID. And I think we've been relatively proactive in the urban realm, which is a good thing. And I think and that should be commended. I think the society and stakeholders have come together, and the cities has manifested some leadership in trying to help retailers, trying to help commercial streets, try to re-enliven the downtown core. So I think that's been a good thing. I think lessons learned is that we've been mostly adaptive, for social distancing, for pandemic, for regulations and queuing and stuff like that, which is a short-term perspective. And we had to do it, and we did what we could. Some things were a success, and some things were less of a success, but we've learned from it. And I think that we've done many projects that have been fun or have been playful. I think that maybe it embodies the Montreal Latin joie de vivre and coming together. So we've seen lots of these temporary parks or temporary spots and places for people to come together, but with social distancing, and to congregate. So I think that's been the two main trends. We've been adaptive and we've been fun and playful. I think the fun and playful side was for to reassure people, to say that it's safe, to combat fear, to remind us that maybe it looks like a children's playground. So we've seen lots of colors, lots of swings, lots of things, but I think they haven't been projecting too much far in the future. So I think, we've been adapting in the short term, and I think we have to ask ourselves why. What do we want to do? I think we lack for now in Montreal, maybe elsewhere, we lack a compelling narrative on our downtown. Why? The Simon Sinek, the question, why? What makes downtowns relevant? What makes them essential to our future? And I think we need to ourselves, and we also need to communicate about the why. So I think, in my opinion, I think that urban living, or not I think, but urban living is the dominant form of human habitation community now in the world. So we know it's above 50%, and we know that in the future, urban living is just going to become more prevalent. So we are now, and going forward, a more urban species than before. So and the trend is augmenting. Even with COVID, we're still remaining urban. I think that as an ecological footprint of 9 to 10 billion people, I think we absolutely need, for our survival, to be living in urban dense environments. I think that urban dense environments have other qualities or other. I think that living together, I think in a downtown makes us more tolerant. I think it helps being more inclusive, living together, adapting. I think the past year, we've been isolated. Maybe we've lost a bit of that gregarious of being together and relating and coming together. I think that it hasn't helped us to come together. So I think that this downtown has a role to play of us living together. So if we come back to to Martine's point of the developers, I think that we need to reconnect with a big of a civic responsibility for our developers. I think they have it, but I think that I don't see it as a zero-sum game. I don't see that contributing to the greater good in a project. I don't necessarily believe that it costs more, or that you'll make less profits, or there aren't many disadvantages. We've done many projects where, if you reflect on your project outside the dotted line, and you think about the externalities of your project on its immediate environments, on a neighborhood, on the users, and if you have empathy and you introduce that in your way of designing the city, or designing the urban ensembles, or even single buildings, I think that you can bring to the table elements that will create greater value for everyone. And that, in the end, is a good thing for the developer, because his project will gain more acceptability. His project will have in the long term greater value. And I think it's just being more. You need to be creative to be able to create those lever effects where you create positive externalities for the community. It could be as simple as a blind wall with the famous tennis court line there, and people play tennis or basket. That's very simple, but it could be more engaging than that. Giving some space to do a park, pedestrianizing certain areas. I think that we can't just count on our public institutions and the city to achieve this city that we want to see, this compelling, this inclusive, this city of the future. I think that the private sector has a real role to play. I think that if I look at the Quebec or the Montreal experience, maybe this is an angle where we struggle more, is how to leverage the private sector's even willingness to achieve what I've just talked about. There is a willingness, but there's a discomfort on how to work together to get to the results. So because of all kinds of reasons, there's that challenge for us.
There's a couple of things that are maybe a little counterintuitive that you make me think of. One is, interventions don't have to be big; they can be quite modest, right? As you say, a swing set, something that enlivens the street. I mean, I know all of us have these anecdotes about chalk, kids putting chalk on the ground, and all of a sudden they create a sense of place by doing it. But if you think of cities as incubators of spontaneity and of self-organization, I suspect this isn't a popular comment I'm going to make, but I'm interested about encampments actually being a reflection of spontaneous organization, you know. And Martine, I hear you and your concern about how the authorities just clamp down on encampments, and before you know it, it's something to be fearful of, as opposed to, you know, in other cultures and other parts of the world, informal housing and informal transportation actually become part of the solution. And then ultimately you find ways to create the support systems around them so that they're safe and all that kind of thing. And I know that in the homeless community, as I suggested, this is a controversial notion, but it's also in the municipal community. Encampments are seen as you suggested, there's something that people have to disband, as opposed to us learning from them and saying, what is it about an encampment that is that draws people versus a hostel of some other description? You know what I mean? Like, I think that I'm not trying to idealize any of it, but I'm just suggesting what Michel was suggesting around us understanding spontaneity and understanding that solutions could be granular. So I appreciate that. You know, years ago, we're going to come back to encampments, Martine. Don't think we're losing it because we won't. We'll come back to it. But Michel, do you remember in Montreal? I was living in New York at the time, and I came up to see it. Somebody did an art installation of swings. Do you remember this? It was in the Quartier de Spectacle, and there was. Do you remember? And you anybody else go to Montreal during this period of time? And you were on the swing set, and as you propelled yourself, it created a sound. And then somebody got on the swing next to you and it created another sound. It was a wonderful, wonderful project that came out of Montreal, and I think they brought it to New York. And it was a very modest footprint, but it created that sort of reflection of something spontaneous. Let's talk about the challenge that you're proposing to developers, and let's ask Alkarim. You can just represent the sector all alone, Alkarim. Talk to us about, because you are a developer and you are on the ground in Calgary. So take it away, man. Tell us how do we get your sector to get with the program, as Michel was suggesting?
I was going to ask if you could just skip me and if I could sit back here silently as the evil developer with their own merits. You know what? I'm grateful to be here and be a part of these conversations, because it's not often that developers get to engage, on forums with architects and planners. And personally, to me, it is very important. I've learned a tremendous amount over my career in the last 15 years working within established neighborhoods and redevelopment areas. And I've started to take a really keen interest into kind of the mixed market affordable housing and how we start to build more equitable communities. Calgary just tried to pass what was the guidebook for great communities, which was really about making our inner cities more accessible and providing more housing choices. Ultimately, we had hundreds of people come out and feel like the R1 residential single family home district was threatened. And so this thing didn't get passed in the merit that it was initially intended for. And they spent years engaging on it. But there was this overwhelming fear of, what are you bringing to my neighborhood, and who are you bringing to my neighborhood, and who is preserving the rights of the single family R1 kind of Mount Royal, heritage home? Who's doing that for us? And so it's the one thing I think I've learned is polarities are very, very ineffective in having these discussions. And whether it's urban, suburban, whether it's the financialization of developers versus the intent of the public. And I think Michel said it really well, is we need to bring these people together in order to kind of see the best outcomes come to light. COVID has been very difficult, and I don't want to kind of allude to the fact that it's been interesting here for Calgary. I understand many lives have been lost. It's been very, very challenging. But for Calgary, it's actually been this amazing opportunity, because not only was our downtown core hollowed out from the oil and gas sector, essentially, retracting, and us saying, okay, wow, we've lost our entire property financial tax base. Like, we have a huge tax issue now. And so COVID came on top of that and said, okay, you have a 30% vacancy. Now you have a 60% vacancy. And now we're challenging the idea of whether or not people ever return to the core as they once were. And so our downtown, I feel like, was built as really a central business district. It wasn't really built for people, walkability, urban scape. And so I think, what COVID has done for us here is it said, we need to fix this, and we need to fix it in a very meaningful way. And so it recently announced $450 million of investment going into our downtown, and being very thoughtful about, where does that go? Greenscape, urban, arts, affordability. Because, to Martine's point, 80+% of downtown Calgary is owned by the pension funds, and it's owned by the REITs. And what they've kind of said is, we're happy to sit back and keep our buildings empty and pay this low prop tax base, because we don't know if anyone's ever coming back. And so, they're kind of have their backs up against the shoulder, saying, we're not willing to come to the table with any kind of capital dollars. And I'm speaking as a generalist here, because there's some firms like Aspen who have done an incredible job at trying to innovate and bring back these tech communities. TrioVest as well is working really hard on, what is our Stephen Avenue, our main street of our downtown look like. And we have Jan Gell who's working on some of the planning merits there. But ultimately, like, for me, the frustration that I have is kind of what Martine shared, is there's this idea that the development institution is egregious and they don't want to find a win-win. And I think that's the issue is, I think there is a win-win, and oftentimes these non-for-profits or affordable groups don't have the resources that they need in order to deliver what they're looking for. And so you think about, the federal government saying, hey, we have billions of dollars that we want to flow into affordable housing. And then you go to these affordable housing groups and they're like, we're not developers. Like, we don't know how to resource this accordingly. And so the reality is I think there is a way to marriage these things together. And I think there is an opportunity to bring mixed market, to bring kind of, the redevelopment of these towers that are sitting empty for us and revitalization of them. But I think it's going to take a combined effort. I agree with Martine, the arena discussion in Calgary has been polarizing, because it's like, are we going to give, a hockey team $250 million to build a new arena? What is the community benefit? What is the benefit as a public person, to have that arena? And I grew up in a part of Calgary where I didn't go to the downtown until I was 16. Like, my parents didn't take me there. It wasn't culturally a part of my life. I didn't go to a Flames game until I was like 18. And so when you think about those public dollars going into those investments, I also have those same concerns. But I think we need to be very careful about creating generalizations around, the industry and what we're hoping for, because I do believe we all want the same outcome, and we have to believe people are good people generally, is how I feel. And so it's really about meeting in the middle, which I think where we'll find true innovation. And so I'm excited about Calgary's downtown, and I do believe these things will come back. And I'm excited that people are starting to think about downtowns as spaces for people, how we live, interact at the ground level, rather than how we work on the 50th level. And so I'm truly excited about the opportunities here and what COVID has kind of brought to fruition.
That's interesting. The idea that you'd actually reground downtowns. I mean, prior to COVID, I think when we were in Calgary, not everybody, but lots of people on City Talk know that we do something called COI Local, and we were in Calgary at the end of last year. In fact, we have reports coming out next week on some of our COI Local programs, where we go into a city and we're there for a week of intense, how we first met Alkarim, and we meet with all sorts of stakeholders to hear what the priorities are in that city. Next week, we're in Windsor, and the reports on Calgary and Edmonton are coming out in conjunction with our arrival in Windsor. But prior to COVID, you had 400 empty office floors in Calgary. The mayor made it really clear to me, and he said, we've got to try to reimagine this piece. And when Martine mentioned the idea of financialization and said that they've just become safe havens for what I call headless capital. So money that doesn't even know where it is. The stewards of those funds they've never even been in downtown Calgary, but a REIT might have an ownership there. And in New York City, where I used to live, we talked about all these top floors being basically safety deposit boxes in the sky, and they had absolutely no connection at all to community. They had no awareness of community. It was really detached capital. So, Ken, I'm going to come to you next, but I think Alkarim has raised some interesting things and to sort of counter some of what you said, Martine, about how do we actually move forward, and is there a way to collectively move forward? Okay, Ken, over to you, urban designer and working in a bunch of different places. What's your perspective on whether we can get a revolution or not, and what's happening in downtown?
Thanks, Mary. Revolution is a strong word, but certainly a powerful evolution. And I just want to start with something that you and I have talked about, which is COVID as a particle accelerator, revealing things. And so first of all, what do we mean when we say downtown? And if I take Toronto, I think there are two different worlds. One is the financial district, which is 100 acres of a monoculture of big office towers, which dropped down to an occupancy rate of 4% and is dead as a doornail. The other version of downtown is where Petula Kark went, which is Yonge Street. And Yonge Street, where there was live music, there were the great department stores, shopping, people watching, all of those attributes of urban life that we all love. And I think what COVID has revealed is that the CBD, planning term of art, the Central Business District, is obsolete. It's a dead duck. On the other hand, the lively downtown where people get together and do all those playful things that Michel was talking about and have fun and enjoy each other's company is making a comeback, and will come back even more forcefully. So in Toronto, we finally got around to saying we're going to take out 2 lanes of traffic on Yonge Street through the downtown. We're going to widen the sidewalks. We're going to make it safe for pedestrians, for cyclists, all the good lessons learned. And I think the Central Business District, the financial district, more painfully, in a way that's more difficult, is going to go through perhaps a revolution. And the revolution that I'm predicting is that those office towers are going to be hacked. A lot of them will turn into mixed use, including residential, including cultural, institutional uses, because they will otherwise sit empty. And eventually the REITs are going to get tired of sitting on empty real estate. The city's chief planner is already talking about new uses for some of those towers. I know some of the owners are talking about new uses for some of those towers. They make great apartments. They have high ceilings. Some of those really sterile granite plazas are going to sprout playgrounds. We've seen that happen in Lower Manhattan with the conversion of C and B office buildings, with now Lower Manhattan becoming a neighborhood. So that's at that end. At the other end of that paradigm, we had bedroom dormitories throughout the region where people commuted, 500,000 of them, in fact, to that Central Business District, 5 days a week, 9 to 5, coming on commuter rail or highways. And that really harkened back to another era. I'm going to ignore the telephone. So if you can, it's going to ring 4 times. You just leave it. Think of all those movies we saw from the 40s with all the men in hats, and they were all men, getting off the commuter trains in places like Grand Central Station, and the women as homemakers. So there was a real gender thing going on in terms of social equity with that version of the city. I think that's being challenged. And I think what we're going to see is at the other end, in where the bedroom dormitories were in the suburbs, we're going to also see a mix with a lot more employment that used to be all located in the one financial district, spreading out through all the region, giving us lively new neighborhoods, new districts where people can live and work closer to home, where the combination of working online and working in person is going to happen much more successfully. So altogether, I see some very salutary changes coming out of this exposure to COVID.
Thanks, Ken. Ever the optimist. I just want to encourage people who are on the chat to change your settings to panelists and attendees. Otherwise, your comments just come to the 5 of us, which is 6 of us, which is nice. We're happy to see them, but I think everyone should see what you're saying. So switch your settings, please. In terms of that particular description that you just gave, Ken, I often talk about Canada being the most urbanized country in the world, but in fact, it's the most suburbanized country because most people actually live in the suburbs. And the question, I guess, we had a bit of a pushback of when we started Restore the Core, because Michel, as you just suggested, the big question is why? Why do we need downtowns? And there are people, as we all know, who flooded into the discourse when the pandemic started and said, that's it, end of the city, done, we don't need to go downtown anymore. And you're just suggesting, Ken, that we could see a redistribution perhaps. I mean, planners have been saying for years we need more employment in other districts, and you guys started to put plans together. It didn't actually happen in that way. It's still congregated. So what do we think? Do we think that the congregation of capital is just going to continue to push us into those central areas? Martine, how are you optimistic about what might happen, or do you feel there have to be if so, what are the specific interventions that you'd be proposing to make sure that the downtowns become more of what you think they should become? Martine, I'm going to start with you.
Well, one of the things that we did see in the post-war period was this shift of capital from central cities to the suburbs, right? And then starting around the 70s, you start to see capital shift back. This is a classic pattern of gentrification. And so you often have this disconnect between the amount that you can be making from a certain place, the potential amount, and the amount that you are making. And so whenever you see devaluation, that's just the other side of the coin for revaluation later in time, right? So this is like the classic pattern of uneven urban development that urban geographers have described. So I think that when you see devaluation in urban centers of certain types of real estate, you're really priming that area for kind of
you mean to be taken over by private equity, but
opportunistic capital is this kind
right.
of like vulture swooping in a way.
Yeah. I mean, Bruce Katz, who's America's great economist trying to advocate for the revival of urban centers, he says he calls it parasitic capital. So what do you see then as the interventions to prevent that? Because the other anecdotes we would have, and I wonder if Calgary is on the verge of this, is that if things get devalued, it may in fact mean that it's then more possible for conversion. Is it more possible that artists and not-for-profits, in the Lower Manhattan anecdote that Ken relayed, when the city of New York after 9/11 decided to make Lower Manhattan a mixed neighborhood, to lots of criticism, and said they're going to introduce housing and do conversions, it was actually artists and nonprofits that first went into that space. So do you think, Martine, it's possible that we could see that it wouldn't necessarily be just swooped in by parasitic capital, but it could be actually intentional capital with intentional uses?
Sure. I think what you would need, I mean, the title of this is Revolution. So we're thinking of maybe very transformative, radical changes in the way that we think about how our cities are operated. And yeah. So if you have buildings that are being left empty by lazy landlords and capitalists who are going to wait back until they can make money, well, those should be acquired by the city and the city can run them. I mean, I think I was interested to hear Alkarim describing how 80% of downtown Calgary is owned by these financial firms who are sitting back and abandoning the city in its time of need. I don't see why we would count on these types of firms to be great partners in the revitalization of a city.
You're not too sad about that.
No, I mean,
you're saying let them go.
I'll also say that, like, we don't have to speculate on what their goals are. They put their objectives in their documents, right? And those objectives are always clear cut. It's to raise the net asset value of the REIT, if we're looking at publicly traded REITs, and to give regular dividends to the shareholders. And those are the priorities. Those are the objectives, and they come above everything else. So to believe that you're going to have a great partner who's going to give up some of that profit, that's not going to happen. We've seen how these types of firms have acted during COVID. They pay out dividends to their shareholders while they're denying PPE to like workers in long-term care homes. So to me, I think that there could be a too charitable of an attitude towards these financial firms. And this COVID has really like opened our eyes on this in the way that these firms are extracting value from our communities. And they're in the real estate in our communities from what they can take from it, not what they can contribute. And we want partners and firms that will contribute to creating a better social space going forward.
So one of the things that I've wondered about with main streets, remembering that these two sides of the coin, is whether we'll ultimately need to go to community land trust ownership of Main Street retail, back to the regrounding, that the only way that we're going to be able to actually prevent, the Main Street, the parasitic version of that would be only high-end coffee shops and chain restaurants and drugstores can locate on those places, right? So the question is, how do you keep the mom and pop? How do you keep the granular? And there would be a particular intervention. Al, when you hear Martine raise this question that you can't really trust capital, basically, what's your counter to that? Because I mean, the old story, some of us do know decent REIT heads? I mean, there are not that many of them potentially, but how do you counter Martine's distrust for the structure that she feels just ultimately will be a negative one?
Well, I don't know if I necessarily would counter that mentality. What I would say though is like there is a profound level of access to information, technology, and accountability that we as people, we as leaders, and we as public can start to hold these financial institutions to that they've never ever experienced before in the past. And so, think about like a Heinz, for example. Do you think Heinz wants to be on the front page of the newspaper as a company who has abandoned a city, who has left their building sitting and is not willing to partake in what redevelopment or what is good for people? And so I think there is this new movement of ESG. And I do think these firms are starting to be concerned about their reputational risk and how they contribute to cities. And I think we will start to see who will rise to the top and who may not. But I think, again, like I said, the polarity of it is I think really harmful. Like, I don't think it's about pointing fingers. I think it's about holding them accountable and bringing them to the table to find out what resolution is and what the future could potentially look like. I'm not a pension fund. I'm not a REIT head, and I have conversations with those folks all the time, because obviously like debt capital is one of the ways in order for us to actually see, the main streets get built. But Mary, you just brought up like maybe some of those spaces are held for mom and pops, or maybe there's affordable rent rates that are held, or maybe there's affordable lease rates that are held. Those are the type of innovative thoughts that I think we need to bring to the table, and mechanisms that we can put in place to kind of see the change take place. The fear that I have about like leave them the way they are or let's buy them back. I don't think the city has the capital oftentimes to buy them back. But the thing that I get nervous about is like they're sitting on these things as 100 to 500-year lenses. Like they're not in a hurry to fix this problem. And so how do we now encourage them to fix this problem? And I'm not saying write them checks, but it's like bringing them to the table as a key stakeholder to say, this is what we're doing. We need you to be at the table because it's going to be pivotal for us to get to the outcome that we're hoping to achieve.
There's a couple of things that you've mentioned there. One is this notion of transparency. So can we insist on new rules of transparency so that we can at least hold accountable the kind of predatory behavior that you're describing that we know exists? And that notion of speculation and sitting on stuff, I lived in New York City for a number of years, and we had it all over New York City where a retail space would just sit empty for 4 years so that the owner was speculating, and it's just crazy. It kills the street. So that would be one thing. The second thing would be what I think you're suggesting is, are there regulations? Are there bylaw steps? Come on into the chat, folks. Give us some suggestions about what are the tangible acts that could take place that would catalyze this kind of diversification of tenancy. Like one I'll throw out is, and I know this is being considered, and I think it's true in the UK, that governments can't, when they want to dispose of a property, there are steps that they have to go through to satisfy that there isn't another public use, either within the department they're in or the level of government they're in, or then they have to go to another level of government, and they have to, all these things have to happen before, and wouldn't it be great if the community then had an option to buy before it actually goes into the private market, so that you can, are there other measures we could be taking? Michel, in Quebec, you guys have thought about this a lot. Are there other measures we could be taking to ensure a diverse owner mix in downtowns and on main streets? What do you think about this?
Well, I would, that's a very good point. And I think without being too granular, I think we need to focus also on solutions and how do we make this happen in the short term. I think that you mentioned what I would verbalize as enlightened procurement or disposal of, not disposal, but sale of sites. Like a city can intervene, that's a place that the city can intervene. And at Laab, we're working, we're finalists on an international competition for the C40. I don't know if you know this, but it's called C40 Reinventing Cities. And it's an association of cities across mostly Europe, but some in Asia, some in North Africa, and some in the US, some in Canada. And the idea is to have a city to adhere to an enlightened sales process for a site, for a city-owned site. So they say, we won't sell necessarily to the highest bidder. So we'll sell based on these criteria. How does it contribute to the community? That's one thing. How is it, and it's very ambitious because then it's net zero. How can the building or the ensemble become net zero? So that's another thing which is very important. And then the price is of course important, but it's based on also is it a good architectural and urban integration project. So these three criteria kind of weigh out the question of how much you're offering for the site. So I think this is a very practical and tangible way that cities could do is revise their procurement process for projects and for sites. That's the thing. I think also that, you know, the COVID crisis has shown that our downtowns aren't that resilient. And the reason why they're not resilient, in my opinion, is that they're over specialized. So I think that the days of specialized zoning saying, you know, this is an office tower and this is industrial and they're separate and they're siloed, I think specialized zoning is a bit is outdated. So I think that we need to move towards a more flexible zoning framework that allows for more than mixed use, hybrid uses together in the same building. It's complicated to make it work and to authorize this, but I think we need to move towards there. We need to move towards more micro zoning to avoid, a whole district that's the use in this whole district. We need to be open to micro zoning. I think also moving from, we like to think that buildings should be designed as platforms or as systems rather than shapes and uses, because uses are
they vary, they change.
Not very resilient. Once there's no more office, then what do you do with your building? So I think a more purpose-driven zoning could make sense rather than use-driven zoning. I know this is a change of paradigm.
No, that's okay. Spoken like a true architect. And so, Ken, you can step back in because we've already had somebody on the panel say, why don't we have a planner on the why don't we have a planner on the panel? Someone in the chat is asking. So this is the yin yang of who guides these decisions: planners, designers, zoning, no zoning. Do you want to just step into this for a minute, Ken, and comment based on your experience trying to push zoning for many years, obviously? Thoughts?
So I'm going to pick up on Michel's last comment about hybridity. And the answer to—
Can you define hybridity for people that don't have—
buildings that serve multiple purposes, neighborhoods that serve multiple purposes, but in particular buildings, which is something new. And in answer to your last question, I think good ideas can come from all sides of the table, from the for-profit sector, from the not-for-profit sector, from government. And we shouldn't have the idea that any one group has a monopoly on good ideas. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm currently working on a project in Cambridge near the MIT campus, where one of these evil developers, Alkarim, specializes in life science labs, is building into the base of that building a community-based performing arts center. This is a combination that is unique in the world. It has never happened. It's being done with the full participation of a whole range of community groups in and around Cambridge. And it's part of a whole interesting move away from the specialization. This was not imposed by the city. It was really the community and the developer got together and are making this happen, which is really interesting. I think cities have an incredible capacity to learn. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes we make mistakes, but I'm going to point to a bullet I think we're dodging in Toronto right now. We have an area called East Harbor, which is a 38-acre site on the eastern shoulder of downtown, where we were poised to recreate the financial district at King and Bay with a monoculture of office buildings for 50,000 new, well-paid, new economy employees and not one single person living. Oddly enough, the province of Ontario, which I have many problems with under the current administration, and the developer in this case, Cadillac Fairview, are pushing for mixed use and are having to persuade the city, which was hanging on to its obsolete obsession with single-use zoning. So again, my point that things can come from different sides of the table. But I think this idea, and Martine, I'm going to go to your point about social equity, of making equity in all its forms part of everything we do. So part of that is, who is downtown for? Mary, one of your original questions. Well, it's got to be for people of all ages, of all incomes, for families with kids. We're increasingly seeing people raising their families, living in vertical neighborhoods. What does that mean? It means daycare, it means schools, it means playgrounds, it means community and recreation centers. It means finding innovative ways of getting that's fine-grained retail. Here's an idea that's really interesting. In City Place, which I'm looking at out my window, on one of the main streets, there is a row of tiny live-work units where people live above the stores, and they have their own micro businesses, which could never afford to pay full retail rent. And they provide professional services. It's everything from barbershops to little cafes, to filling out your taxes, to making your clothes. Really interesting, innovative physical design idea that's enabling that to happen. My final point, and I want to pick up on one of Michel's points, is about playfulness. And we at the Bentway, which is one of our great projects downtown that I'm working on, are just introducing our opening from COVID is all about kids play, not just in the Bentway, but all through the neighborhoods. And you'll be pleased to know that one of our opening acts is Daily Tous les Jours, which is just opening, was mentioned on the chat, which is just opening a remarkable thing called Walk, Walk, Dance, which people will visit. So I think that that element of spontaneity, of playfulness, of magical, one-of-a-kind things in downtowns as one-of-a-kind places is something we shouldn't lose sight of.
They're the swing people. That's wonderful. And thank you for those. Thank you for people who've been putting into the chat these references to catch up with us. Thanks. Here's the dilemma, though, Ken. Think about it. If you were coming off an office building in Montreal, or you were coming out of an office building in Calgary or in Toronto, it would, prior to COVID, it would be predominantly white people you'd be seeing. And I'm really struck, again, I'm in an American city. I've spent 15 years working in American cities. It's a very different picture in American cities. And so much more diverse, much more visible presence of BIPOC. And I'm curious about this, whether or not we're going to see this fundamentally change, because we are the most diverse country, and yet we don't see it in the downtown CBDs. So we lack diversity of every kind, really. We don't have diversity of use. We don't have a diversity of user. And are we going to see some kind of radical shift? And that may take particular interventions to support Black business, to support Indigenous-led business, to support immigrant business. Anybody want to weigh in on this in terms of, are we going to be able to find the downtown to become a more complete neighborhood on every scale, including
Mary,
socially?
If I can just go back to my point by what do you mean when you say downtown? If you go to Canoe Landing Park, which is right downtown in the heart of City Place, and sit in that—
in Toronto, just remember we're national here. Yeah.
Where the population looks like are over 50% visible minorities, over 50% people born in another country. And you look at all the people playing pickup soccer, the kids in the playground, people doing all manner of things. It is as diverse as it possibly can be.
So are you saying basically, don't worry about the CBD? Basically, that, I mean, Martine,
I'm not saying don't worry. I'm saying that 100 acres, which is the last refuge of that idea of the specialized monoculture, has to undergo radical surgery. The moment you get away from that 100 acres on all sides, it starts to be more lively, more innovative, more mixed, more diverse. And the 100 acres is a throwback to another era.
Every city is going to have a 100-acre throwback, and we'll just put all the statues of Egerton Ryerson in those places and just put it around. Okay, the closing comments for everybody. Can I just have each of you throw out something in terms of, this? If a revolution's possible, give us something tangible that you think we should be focusing our advocacy on that needs to change to make that revolution possible. First to you, Martine.
Yeah, I'll just say that I think we could enter a grand era where we try something truly innovative, which is to have much, much more publicly funded housing. This is something we have not tried. We tried it a bit in the post-war period, and we got lots and lots of public housing built, and that's some of the only remaining affordable housing that we have in a lot of these downtown cities that, just speaking to the previous discussion, are gentrified, right? In the city of Toronto, we've got the suburbanization of racialized poverty as people who are lower income, racialized, and immigrant households being pushed further and further away from the core.
So you would double down on housing in the downtown?
Yeah, and meaningful investment.
Public housing.
Yeah. Say we've had like years and years of public-private partnerships and public development of things. I'm not seeing inequality going down. I'm seeing it getting worse. So I think we should innovate with like a broad new public purpose and a lot more resourcing towards that.
And really make downtowns for people and provide housing for public housing so that you'd have a mix. Okay, I'm hoping on the chat people will throw in, what do you think the one thing is? Thanks, Martine. Al, what would your one thing be?
I don't know if I have one thing, but just on Martine's point, like Calgary Housing Corporation just put out a release saying 100% of their units are unlivable in Calgary. So they have 15,000 units in the city of Calgary, and they did a survey, and 100% of their units came back as generally unlivable. And so the public sector housing management is something I get really nervous about, because I feel like those people have a right to a certain standard of housing. And I really believe there's a private sector key there. The Green Line was mentioned here, and I didn't talk about transit, but I think accessibility to our cores is really important. And I think making those places destinations that draw in those cultures, those different people, the arts. And I think our downtowns have to be about people at the ground level, and we have to bring them there for a different reason than we ever used to. And I think that's what will change everything. And to Ken's point, like, we need people living in our cores, inside of those, in that 100 acres, and same with our Calgary downtowns. We need to start seeing those buildings being revitalized, and I think both private and public will need to play an important key role to achieve it.
So ground up urbanism, back to that, and the notion of public and private. I think probably to interpret what Martine's calling for, she's saying public housing that's properly invested and actually has adequate resources to operate, which has always been the dilemma in Canada. The governments get involved in the creation of the darn things and then they step out. So that can't happen. It's got to be sustained public investment, both in transit and in housing. Michel, last thing from you. What would the one thing be that you'd focus on? Advocate for?
Okay, hard to target only one. Let me say a major insight in the last year. I saw this morning. We're publishing a report to help the commercial streets in Montreal, and it's just about to be published. One of the great insights that we saw is that 60% of users of retail streets or mixed-use streets have a disability. 60%. Either cognitive or physical or a language barrier, which makes our environment very exclusive when we think about it. So I think one of the challenges and call to action I would give to designers and architects and planners and developers is to be more inclusive, that our environments be, yes, to disabilities. For wheelchair access, we've done a great deal of work, and I think it's much better than it was, and we've made a lot of progress. But I think that we need to be inclusiveness to diversity. Also in Quebec, we see it of language. We need to, it needs to be more intuitive, more ergonomic, more inclusive, better integrated. So I think this is a call to action. Because
I'm gonna stop you there and go to Ken, and you're gonna keep your profession busy. Let's hope they're listening to you, Michel. Last word to you, Ken. Really, 10 seconds. What do you got?
Okay, the one word will come from our mentor Jane Jacobs, which is diversity. Diversity in every sense that Michel was talking about: diversity of people, of incomes, of ages, of uses. The importance of public space, which we haven't talked about enough. COVID has just shown that people are desperate to be able to be together in public space. We have in most of our downtowns not enough. And so really that has emerged as a major need. But I think if you apply that lens to everything we're doing, so I'm going to make a pitch for a chord, not a single note. That
okay.
You really have to look at all of those things together. They're mutually reinforcing.
Got it. Thank you, guys. Listen, and gal. Listen, a great session. Next week, we're in Windsor, as I said, for CUI Local. So we'll be broadcasting from Windsor. There's lots of sessions that we hope you'll come in to listen to. We'll also be releasing those local reports from Edmonton and Calgary, and we have a City Talk next week, a slightly different time because we're coming out of Calgary and Edmonton with the mayors from both there. So Don Iveson and Naheed Nenshi, joined by Ashlyn Bernier, Mohammed El Sagir, Leanne Ireland, and Irfan Raji, all talking about two cities working in a provincial economy that is extraordinarily challenged. Imagine today, well, you know, Al, with the canceling of the Keystone, everybody is all hands on deck figuring out how the future of those cities are going to drive a different kind of economic life. So thanks, folks, for coming on, and thanks for such interesting comments in the chat. We really appreciate it. We're looking forward to continuing this conversation because it's only the beginning of the revolution to reimagine a different kind of downtown and different kinds of cores. So thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next week for City Talk.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.